Today, I have the great pleasure of speaking with Chantel Cohen. She is a coach, she's a therapist, she's helping people with the Google startup. And she has this mix between a marriage therapist, a coach, a company, and at the end of the day, she is focusing on helping women business owners. Enjoy the conversation with Chantel. Hello, and welcome to a new episode of the Business of Meaning podcast. Today, I have the great pleasure of speaking with someone, on one hand, was named one of the top 3 marriage counselor in the Metro Atlanta region a few years ago. And she is helping a lot of companies. She is the founder and CEO of CWC Coaching and Therapy, and she's providing therapy and coaching services to entrepreneurs. And in particular, she is on a mission to empower entrepreneurs of color, women business owners, and founding duos to create the lives they always imagined for themselves. I'm looking forward to very interesting conversation with Chantel Cohen. Chantel, thank you so much for taking the time today.
Oh, thank you for having me, Eric. It's a pleasure to be here.
I think your bio is fascinating. I would never imagine somebody who's one of the top 3 marriage counselor advising entrepreneurs, advising large firm. I mean, you work for clients like Lenovo, Coca-Cola, Discovery Channel, and maybe somehow there are some common points in terms of communication. So how did you cross that bridge?
It's interesting because in 2011, I went to Columbia for graduate school. I went back to Columbia to become a business coach because a lot of the clients that I was seeing were hard driving professionals. And I found that I just loved working with hard driving professionals and hard driving entrepreneurs. They are my people. And you can't work with them without looking at the 3 most important aspects of their lives: their relationship to themselves as an individual, how they're taking care of themselves, their own psychology, their leadership, and how they show up at work. Their careers are extremely important to them, their businesses, and yet sometimes their relationships suffer. And their relationships can be fraught with miscommunication. You can have expectations that aren't met, especially like I've got one founder whose wife is giving him to the end of the year saying, hey, you got to get it together or you got to quit this business. And so you cannot help, especially entrepreneurs. It's there in corporate, but less so. And just to give you an example, my team over the last 3 years have done over 2,500 sessions for Google for startups and their entrepreneurs. So we see a lot of founders. And about a third of those founders come to us for marital or relationship issues. And marital and or partner issues, and then there are co-founder issues. So a lot of the same issues that we see in marriages, we see with co-founders as well. And I'm going to blow your mind with this, Eric. We get about 20% of our founders who are married and they're co-founders too. So they're unique in that way.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So when you speak with those people, especially when the startup, when you have people that they're going to have to start their business, and we know that it's a roller coaster being an entrepreneur, what is your advice then in terms of their relationship with their significant other? Because that's going to be playing a very important role as well.
It is. There are some things in life that we can plan for completely. Entrepreneurship, you described it as a roller coaster, and I often describe it as climbing Everest. It's not as hard to get to base camp to found a company, but you're putting your life in danger, and therefore your family's at risk if you perish on the way to the summit. And so the important thing to do is to start communicating about expectations. If you're a new founder, they're looking at it, and I don't mean to be disrespectful. A lot of people come into it, and I'll say not a lot, but I'm going to put a percentage to this, but I don't have any data to back it up. it's really just kind of based upon the founders that I've seen. People will come in, and I would say at least about 30 to 40% are pretty disillusioned after the first couple of years because they thought that they
Mm,
were going to have a lot more time for their families when they went into entrepreneurship. And so there's this almost contract that happens between, and I'll just for simplicity's sake, I'll just call them married couples, whether same sex or not. These married couples, they talk and they say, okay, well, now we're going to have more time to kind of do some of the things that we wanted to do as a family. And what they find is they're strapped for cash, that that is so stressful, and they have less time than they
mm,
did before. And so talking through that process in CWC, we have one of our values is in our mission, and to help people is we say that everything great begins with a conversation.
mm,
And so we start there, setting expectations. You have to be talking. What I often see are my founders will say something like, oh my gosh, you know what? I had to pay everybody else on the team. I wasn't able to pay myself. And then they'll go home and they won't talk about it because they're
mm,
afraid to talk about it, because so they communicate less. Their partner's in their head wondering when all the freedom is going to happen and the money's going to flow in.
yeah.
And so now they're gagged. They can't talk about what's really happening because they're worried that their partner will say, well, maybe you just need to give this up. But you can
Mm,
imagine if they are curating these conversations and having these touch points, that those conversations become much easier. It's easier to set expectations. It's easier to strategize when there are windfalls or shortfalls, I should say, within the bank account, et cetera. What I find
yeah.
is the founders stop talking. So I guess in a roundabout way, I would say that is what I see most often. And it can be, believe it or not, if they're not communicating, we see marriages break up because of it.
Yeah, no, I can definitely see that. It's a very good point you're making. When you were mentioning about, being cash issues and more time that actually that people thought they would have to put into a business, which is a general rules, I would say, especially when you are a small business entrepreneur. Isn't that also the point of not being able to delegate? Because I see many times people say, "Oh, nobody else would do it as good as I would." And even if 80% delivered is good enough for the customer, they somehow psychologically they don't want to give up the control of some of the process. And so they're unable to delegate where they could have more time if they would just start by delegating and then build their business. What do you think of that?
I think yes and no. Yes, being that if they have, a lot of times I'll encounter, because remember, I'm also a therapist. And if you've got a founder who's come from a background where, let's say that their parent was abusive, or they had a dad that wasn't around, their ability to trust is something
Mm,
that is tested in entrepreneurship
yes,
to
true.
test. So we're always looking at ways and strategies and therapeutic techniques to help the founder move beyond their own psychology. And it can be really tough. And then, secondly, I think where you're absolutely right is they won't ever be able to scale at that rate. It's impossible to scale and try to do it yourself. So there's a guy named David Finkel who wrote a book called Build a Business, Not a Job. And he talks about delegation. And I can't remember, honestly, Eric, if it was in this book. He's written another book called Scale, and I read both of them. But talking about delegating and using, 0 to 10, how capable is this person? So do they have the sort of the intellectual stuff or the experience to do what you're asking them to do?
Mhm.
And then secondly, how high stakes is the actual thing, project, whatever it is you're asking them to do, and scale that. If it's low stakes and high capability, it may be a learning opportunity for them
Yeah.
where you can grow and stretch and delegate and be able to put in those checkpoints so that you can grow your team member. And that's a way to develop trust along the way, because if that employee is meeting expectations for the CEO, visionary entrepreneur, they're going to start to feel comfortable. And then
Mhm.
secondly, if it's high stakes and you've got somebody low capability, you know absolutely that it's not a job for them, and you need to find who is in your organization who can do it. And oftentimes we can start to see the gaps in the roles and functions and where somebody needs to be. And so that's another opportunity to say, do we have the right people in place?
Right. Ah, that's a great point you're making. It makes me think of I was raised in Belgium, where people say, know your strength, know your weaknesses, and work on your weaknesses. Until one day I said, no, I don't want to work on my weaknesses. I want to surround myself with people whose strengths are my weaknesses.
Mhm.
And that's, I mean, for me, the whole concept of between scaling and growing. At scale, yes, everybody's talking about scaling a business, wonderful. How about having a business and growing a business, which might not be 10x, because I know it's very
Right.
popular to say that, but you do
Yes.
have a business and it's bringing revenue and you have a team and you have more time for the people or the things that you want to be spending on. That's
Right.
also something that in our culture is not necessarily talked about. It seems to me like it's nothing or scaling, but there's
Yeah.
the whole world in between.
No, you're absolutely right. It's so funny because I told you I did a presentation for Google for Startups, and every EO person knows about the Wickman and Winters book, Rocket Fuel.
Yeah.
And if we don't have our integrators, that's where an integrator is key, because it can free us up as the business owner, visionary, to kind of do some of the things that we want, have a little more time, and we've got them in place doing some of the day to day. And so you're absolutely right. Like, everybody wants to be a unicorn. I work a lot in tech, and I love tech, real estate, a little bit of construction. Those seem to be a lot of the areas that I'm in. And then everybody else is they're not connected in the different industries they're in. However, it's interesting. Tech people are really programmed to think that they're going to be a unicorn. And sometimes, isn't it nice to be able to make, $1 million in passive income, enjoy
Yeah.
your family, take a vacation, work. I have a friend who's not a client. He's literally a friend who works 50% of the time. And so he has enough work where he's engaged and he feels like he's using his brain and contributing in a meaningful way. And yet the rest of the time he spends with his family.
Mhm.
That's a great life.
Again, it depends on what people want. I think it's a great life. But you're talking about books. There's one that I really recommend to every entrepreneur to read. It's called The Psychology of Money, Morgan Housel.
Oh, I keep saying I want to read that. Yes, you're absolutely
Yes.
right.
And then there's one example where, each chapter is a story. And one of the chapter, I don't know the exact title, but it's How Much is Enough? And it tells the
Yeah.
story of somebody who was the number one of a large, large, large global firm, left that firm, and he was worth $100 million. But it was not enough for him because he was surrounded by billionaires, wanted to be a billionaire, went on into insider trading, went to jail. And so the question is, how much is enough? And yes, you're
Yeah.
right. The culture around us that is great. It's entrepreneurial, but being an entrepreneur can mean so many different things. So I agree with you with that. So I just want to come back to one thing that you said about the person who has some financial challenges in the business and doesn't talk about it with their significant other. Do you see a lot of couples being in business together? And what is your advice for those who are in business with their significant other? Because there might be also other challenges there.
Well, as somebody who is in business with their significant other, my husband is my integrator.
Okay.
So, yes, so it is really important. I couldn't afford my husband for a very long time. And finally, he's come on board, and life is getting better for me as a result. And I think the most important thing is to understand what function and role you have within your company. and your company is not your home. And
Mm.
we really have to be, this is a word no one likes, but I'm going to use it anyway. The D word is we have to be disciplined about knowing which hat we're wearing. And so, as a visionary, as a CEO, my husband, he doesn't defer to me because I'm his wife. He does because of the role that I have.
Mhm.
And there are, as the integrator in our company, it is really important that when he is saying, I want to go with this initiative, this makes sense, this is why. And I may say it doesn't make sense to me, but in the operational role, I defer to him. We've made that decision. And so what happens is we're really clear on who we are in our marriage, and we've gotten clear on who we are in our business. That is so difficult for couples. It's a huge challenge. I mean, I'm even thinking that another business that I want to do is to have entrepreneurial couples for a weekend or for like a 4 day and just kind of break down those things that traditionally haven't done it, haven't, so I have no business if anyone wants to, don't have it yet, but it just, I see it over and over again. And I keep telling my COO and my husband partner of 30 years that we need to do this because people really need us. And it's become very, very popular to partner with your partner as your co-founder. And they do it so naively without really fleshing out the structure, the functions, and how it's going to go, and how what happens at the office. We need to leave that's a role as the CEO. And typically it's CEO and the COO that we're seeing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I feel like there's a business there for me. I just haven't started.
No, and I hear you. And so basically, your advice is to define the roles and stick with the roles, have the discipline to
Yes.
stick with the roles there.
Yes.
Now,
Yes. Thank you for clarifying that. Yes.
so you never ever go home and one of the two of you start speaking about the business?
No, we do talk about the business. We do. We just decide that there are times we're not going to.
Right.
So if like we're having dinner, we only have one at home now, Greg. So we only have our daughters at home. And so when we're having dinner, we don't talk about business. But if we're at lunch, and we typically will have lunch about 3 times a week together, we will talk about what's going on.
Mhm.
And it's perfectly fine. But we define that. And so it's okay. And there's not a whole lot of friction there, honestly. We've gotten pretty good at it.
So Chantel, you're focusing also part of your work on women business owners. What are the common challenge that you see, and what are good advice that women listening to you right now could take into their business and into their life?
If you've got a partner, have your partner read Eva Brodsky's book. She talks about the invisible load of women. The book is called Fair Play. And what we see is so many roles that women are, the hats that they're wearing. That's ultimately kind of what does them in. That's why you see, like, I believe this is a theory that I have, Eric, that 50 over 50 in Forbes was created for women. It's like the kids are out of the house and these women go full tilt. And look at the 50 over 50. It's a lot of women.
Mm.
And so our roles are very, they can work against each other. And so when we have partners that aren't as supportive of our role as an entrepreneur and they're not willing to take on some of that load, it can be the death of our business.
Yeah, that's a very good point. When you talk about communication, so when you get into the business, what is your advice for, again, entrepreneurs, small business entrepreneurs who are not working with their partner, with their life partner? What is your advice in terms of communication about frequency? What do you think about it? There's two theory about one of not saying anything and keeping the stress within you. And the other one is explaining absolutely everything in every challenge. What is the right balance for you?
But Okay, so the question is interesting because it feels very black and white, feels very all or nothing. And most of us reside somewhere in the gray area, right?
Correct.
And so I know you painted two different extremes to give me more clarity. And yet, remember our value. One of the things that we say at CWC is everything great begins with a conversation. So I'm never going to agree with someone bottling it up. It's not good for them. There are some studies that have been done on pain, not psychological pain, physical pain. And they look at how much pain this person is in. And what they've done in some of these studies is they'll have the person who has like a painful procedure that needs to be done, they'll have like one where the whole group is they're just alone. And then they ask them how great was the pain for this procedure. Then they'll have another group where they have like a nurse or somebody who's in the medical facility sit with them, ask them afterwards how painful was the procedure. The third group, they'll have folks who bring a loved one and they'll ask after the procedure, how painful was it? Now,
Mm,
it's not rocket science here. We know that the people who had a loved one with them report less pain. We
mm,
are hardwired for connection.
yeah.
We need each other. And so things don't feel as scary or as painful when we've got someone who truly, genuinely cares for us and is willing to
Mm.
hear us and maybe even offer some advice or simply just allow us the space to vent. So I'm going to say that the research wouldn't support bottling it up.
And you're right with that. I like to paint things extreme to make the point.
No, it gives clarity. I understand.
Absolutely. I was listening to you and said, okay, when you have somebody who's a loved one, somebody you trust, pain is less. Now, I'm not saying that being an entrepreneur is painful. I
Oh,
love it. And it
it
can
is
be
painful.
sometimes. It is painful.
It is,
So,
it is painful. I was talking to just about that life, why would we ever expect entrepreneurship to be one big long sail into the sunset when life isn't that way?
yeah, great.
Marriage isn't that way. Parenthood isn't that way. And so entrepreneurship isn't either. But I call it is an evolutionary journey because we learn
Mhm.
so much about ourselves.
Absolutely. And I definitely agree with you and absolutely love being an entrepreneur and helping entrepreneur.
Me
And
too.
I'm using their example about having somebody you trust and you love with you to go through the painful process. In your work with women business owners and in your work also with empowering entrepreneurs of color, what is your advice? How could someone surround themselves with people that they trust so that they're not alone and overwhelmed to make decisions? What is your advice there?
I think it's really important that entrepreneurs not worry about networking with people who they are pitching to or that are in the same space. We know that an open network is people have more success with an open network rather than a closed one. And so when we open up our network, we start to build advisors. So I believe that you want to surround yourself with people who are not only interesting but successful. I can probably send this to you after. In fact, I know I can. There's some work that's been done at Harvard that 95% of who you hang out with determines your success.
The five
Now,
people you
how they're
spend most time with.
bingo, bingo. So I know that success can be defined many different ways, but it is really interesting. Like at one point, I think being college graduates tend to hang out with college graduates. Now, I'm not a proponent that everybody goes to college, needs to go to college, or is successful. There are plenty of people who decide to become an electrician and own their own business or a welder or something and have a real skill that it's not necessary. But for because I'm a college graduate, I'm going to tell this story. And my son, at one point, it took him till about 10th grade to figure out that he had a choice of whether he went to college or not, because everybody that he knows has a college degree.
Yeah.
He didn't realize it was actually a choice that somebody could make. He
Yeah.
just thought that everybody had to go. So who you hang around with kind of, it almost determines the lenses, the glasses that you wear, the way you see the world. And so it can really determine your success. I do tell entrepreneurs, just as a little side note for those who are fundraising, as entrepreneurs, we're always looking for people to invest, and we're pitching, and we're allowing them to do the choosing. But I don't believe in that. I know that sometimes we just need money, and so we do those things. And
Mm.
yet I find time and time again that investors are offering money and they're not offering anything else. And oftentimes founders, entrepreneurs are customer poor. They need more customers. They need contacts, people that they can interface with, gate openers to help build their customer base. So I always tell people, when you're looking for investors, ask what else they can do besides
Yeah.
giving you money. It needs to be more than that.
Absolutely. That's a great point. And by the way, there's also a criteria to select the people you're going to have as investors.
Yes. So making sure that you're surrounding yourself with people who can help, advisors, investors, even your team are super important. I always recommend the Who book. Have you read that one?
No.
I think it's by Jeff Smart, and I'm trying to remember the other guy's name. I can tell you who it's by, Jeff Smart and somebody else. But they're pretty amazing because they have a great program to help curate the best talent. They have 4-step approach in terms of doing actual hiring. So who you surround yourself with, right? The people, it also in your business. It's who you network with. It's who you allow to invest in your company. And the single most important decision is who you marry. So all
Yeah.
those are like really, really important.
Wonderful. Chantel, I'd like to finish this conversation with bringing it all together with your work on helping mental health and self-development for team, for organization. So you're the marriage counselor, you are the entrepreneur, you are a person helping accelerate a program with Google Startup. What is your advice today in 2024, where we're still having the ripple effect of a pandemic? And being an entrepreneur is also something that is very lonely and overwhelming. What is your advice in terms of mental health for entrepreneurs?
Oh, if I had to be really simplistic, connection. It is, if we ever see each other again, if you ever interview me again, I always say this, that the simplest things sometimes seem the hardest, and yet they're the most impactful. And so we know that people who don't have deep relationships, they die earlier. It is so important for entrepreneurs to be more than just their business. Their business is not going to visit them in the hospital, not going to take them out for dinner. And so what happens is their sense of self gets wrapped up in their business. And so it is important to date. It's important. I mean, obviously, if you want a relationship, there's some people who don't, but most of us do. And it's important to learn how to communicate. And again, this is another thing I say all the time. I call my childhood the great laboratory, because I was an only child, and I lived on a block where the next door neighbors were the Duffs, 7 kids. Across from the Duffs, on the other side of the street, were the Campbells, 5 kids. Next to the Campbells were the Jacksons, 11 kids. And
Wow.
next to the Jacksons were the Bews, 5 kids. And so I hated being an only. I was like, this is for the birds. I learned very quickly. My family used to make fun of me, my parents, because by the time I was like 5, I knew how to say, hi, my name's Chantel. Do you want to be my friend? I knew how to communicate. Really, I knew it. I didn't want to be alone.
Awesome.
And yeah. So we kids are missing out. There's a great book called The Coddling of the American Mind. And they really get into that crime rates went down in the 90s, and yet kids were sequestered inside. Like, I grew up in the 70s. It was super dangerous, but my parents, I was out and about, and I had to learn how to, if my friends were arguing, I had to learn how to settle that dispute. I had to understand that I was always going to get chosen last for, if we had street ball, like baseball, I was every single time. Like, I just knew that I was failing all the time. People used to fight and say they didn't want me on their team. But then if it came to like kickball or dodgeball, I wasn't picked first, but I was definitely one of the valued players. So I dealt with feeling like I wasn't good enough, but I also dealt with, feeling very good about my skills in other areas, conflict resolution, knew how to do that, knew how to start a conversation with someone. And so my entrepreneurs are spending too much time alone. And most of the people that I work with didn't have the great laboratory. They were inside watching TV, and their parents told them, latchkey, don't go outside. You can't go outside. It's too dangerous. Don't talk to strangers because they could kidnap you. And so a lot of these skills are holding entrepreneurs back from not only in networking, but having a well-lived life. And so when you're trying to understand what I do, Eric, I connect founders to holistically understanding themselves, understanding their business and how to make it better and how to show up as a leader, and understanding how to have and cultivate meaningful relationships. And so that's what we do in a nutshell.
Wow, I love it. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you.
Before we go away, how do people get in touch with you?
They can go to Chantel at chantelcohen.com. It's kind of an unusual name. My real name is Chantel Yvette. My family was from Louisiana, so they gave me a French name. And so it's CHANTEL at chantelcohen.com, or they can just reach out at 470-296-3090, and they will get my assistant, my wonderful assistant, Lexi.
Wonderful. Chantel, thank you so much for spending the time with me today.
Thank you so much, Eric. I really appreciate it.
Chantel, thank you so much for speaking with me today, and absolutely love your point about connections. That is so important. It's crucial for any human beings, and specifically for every entrepreneur. Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to connect with me, please do so on LinkedIn or go on the website, eventbusinessformula.com. And if you have enjoyed this conversation, please share it with your network. Thank you. Bye-bye.